Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for spending the day with us today. Well, we've explored the ideas that shape peace. Now we turn to the lived experiences that test it. The next segment, When Peace Breaks Down, reveals how domination shows up in many forms, in families and schools where children learn what love or fear looks like, in governments that enforce injustice and silence dissent, and in systems that strip people of identity, safety, and belonging. Yet within each story, we'll also see the courage to transform pain into purpose and domination into partnership. Our first speaker, Scarlett Lewis, knows this transformation firsthand. In 2012, her 6-year-old son, Jesse Lewis, was one of the children killed in the Sandy Hook school tragedy, the deadliest school shooting in US history. Out of that unimaginable loss, Scarlett founded the Choose Love movement, a global program teaching social and emotional learning in schools and communities. Through her work, she shows what partnership looks like in practice, teaching courage, gratitude, forgiveness, and compassion as the antidote to fear and violence. Please join me in welcoming Scarlett Lewis.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. There is no more important subject to talk about than peace. And where does that begin? Of course, it begins at home. So it's wonderful to join you today. I want to thank you for your paying attention to this subject. Attention is actually the purest form of love, and it's a really great thing to remember as parents, as community members, wherever our attention flows, that's where our energy goes. That's what we're loving at the moment. And yes, I have that little cell phone in the corner because it's a good reminder that we're living life, and that is not life on your phone, and that is not where you're going to be loving and supporting and guiding your kids and creating safer, more peaceful communities. So, I'm here today because of my son, Jesse. Jesse, who was murdered in his first grade classroom. Of course, so much of the violence, substance abuse, mental illness, other societal diseases are preventable. And I wanted to do just that. I wanted to address the root cause of the pain and suffering that one young man felt that led him to become a mass murderer. Of course, he wasn't born that way. And so I wanted to disrupt that cycle of violence and look at everything that was existing, maybe some things that weren't, including neuroscience and the latest science. Sometimes it takes a tragic event to kick us out of our comfort zone. Nobody wants to leave our comfort zone. I certainly didn't. But always remember that pain gets our attention, but then it does move us through fear and into our growth zone. And that certainly happened to me, where I realized that no one was going to show me a roadmap of how to get from where I was after the tragedy, a bereaved parent, to joy, to peace and joy. That's really what I wanted. So I realized that I would create that roadmap myself. My choices in the moment could take me to wherever I wanted to go, and my life could look like whatever I wanted it to look like. And of course, I had a surviving 12-year-old son, and I realized in the moment I was his role model, that how I chose to thoughtfully respond to the tragedy, what I chose to focus on, what my actions were going to be, would shape and model how my son would move through not only this tragedy, but roadblocks and difficulties for the rest of his life. And that awareness helped me. And I think that awareness and reminding you can help you as well. I had a big decision. Was I going to be for something, or was I going to fight against something? There's so much research out there that shows that when we move our efforts, our focus, our attention towards something, rather than fighting against something, there's more chance of success. And certainly we are stronger, healthier, and more capable individuals when we do this. So I chose to be for the most powerful unifying element in the universe. And I have to tell you, it wasn't my idea. It was my 6-year-old son's, Jesse's, idea. He wrote 3 words on our kitchen chalkboard shortly before he died: nurturing, healing, love. This is a spray painted chalkboard on the side of my oven. And if you look at that in the lower left-hand corner, that sent a huge bolt of reality through me, this realization that that was the solution. That's the solution to peace. And this concept that we can choose it, all ages and stages, is absolutely incredible. And it's possible. Peace is possible everywhere. I took that, those 3 words and Jesse's example of courage. He actually is known as a hero. He saved 9 of his classmates. He literally sacrificed his life to save 9 of his first grade classmates. And that, of course, is the same capacity for courage that we all have. Courage is like a muscle. We need to strengthen it and practice it. But that's the courage that we all have to choose our thoughtful response in any moment. And that is exactly what leads to peace. Then I came up with this formula that is neuroscientifically accurate and designed to give us our personal power back, where we can make choices that benefit us and lead us towards a better future. And that is the definition of hope. So gratitude, forgiveness, compassion, and action, all leading towards choosing love. So important. You know, the world out there, if you're feeling stressed and like there's a lot going on, in the latest former U.S. Surgeon General's report in the U.S. Called Parents Under Pressure, it found that 41% of parents are too stressed out to function each day. And that's a problem for our kids. So we need to manage our own anxiety and stress for sure. Of course, we also have an epidemic of loneliness going on around the world, as well as screens, which are pulling us away from each other. We're designed to look into one another's eyes. We have mirror neurons. And when we don't do that, we lose connection. Plus, of course, we have trauma that we carry around with us, which creates a mask, which also makes us not really feel seen and loved. So I will say I started this movement at Jesse's funeral when I got up to speak. And I said it was an angry thought that caused the tragedy. And thoughts are the root cause of suffering, right? These thoughts that we have control over, and we kind of forget that. So the amazing thing to me, and of course, I pictured this little boy having these angry thoughts that then moved into revenge, that then moved into violence. But the amazing thing was that a thought could be changed. So I asked everybody to start thinking about what they think about and to choose a loving thought over an angry thought. Remember, this was the congregation at Jesse's funeral. And they went out to the 4 corners of the world. And I started getting emails, calls, and texts about a week later saying that one simple act had completely changed their lives. And I knew that I was onto something. And so that is one of the foundational components that I think about and remember every single day, this act of self-awareness, thinking about what I think about. And it's amazing that we have, I noticed that we have this negative bias where majority of our thoughts are negative and almost 95% repetitive every day. And I'm talking about the cognitive triangle for those of you who have psychology backgrounds. Our thoughts directly impact how we feel, which determine how we behave. And it's really interesting. Every single day, we can use this for people that we interact with at home, in our communities. If we're not seeing positive behavior, then we know that these people aren't feeling well and they're not thinking well. That can spark some empathy in us where we can actually be helpers rather than people that hinder. Because here's the bottom line. We can't always choose what happens to us in the world. And bad things happen to really good people every single day. We We read about it in the headlines, and sometimes those people are us. But the truth is, we can choose how we respond in every single interaction, situation, circumstance that we face every single day. We can choose our thoughtful response. And based on what we respond, we're either in control or out of control. We're either reacting or thoughtfully responding, and the outcomes look vastly different. We're either coming from a place of fear or a place of love. And when we realize that it's a choice and when we understand how to make that choice, it is life-changing. And it was life-changing for me. So I'm really sharing with you my pathway from traumatized, grieving mom to becoming a leader of a worldwide movement to choose love, and how I did that, and how we're teaching schools, homes, and communities all around the world to do it. It's simple. It boils down to a simple formula, which I've shared with you, and a simple model. But of course, simple isn't always easy. If we want peace at home, we need to focus on that. And where does it come from? It comes from ourselves. It comes from the inside out. It comes from our effort. And so I'm going to go through a little bit of this with you and actually leave this gift with you that you can take and you can practice for the rest of your life, because you'll never master it. I haven't mastered it yet, even though I'm the Choose Love lady, but you will have the skills, tools, and models. And then if you're interested in our free programming, you can go to our website. But our personal power as humans is in our ability to choose from moment to moment how we thoughtfully respond. And that's our personal power. We see people reacting out of fear every single day, and we see the outcomes of that. But those aren't people that are in control or in their personal power. The people that we see that are thoughtfully responding with love, they are in control. They are in their personal power. But here's the thing, we get triggered every single day over the smallest things. We can have this incredible conversation together today. We can be focusing on peace, and then we can turn around and, our spouse is there and, I don't know, not making the bed, and it can be so annoying to us. And we get triggered. We get triggered for so many different reasons, including our own trauma that we may not even be aware of. We just know that somebody says or does something, and all of a sudden we feel this kind of metaphorical type dukes coming up in our brain, this defensive response, because our brain's number one job is to keep us safe. And so really that trigger is a warning signal coming into your brain saying, hey, this is something you've told somebody not to do, or they, that's potentially hurtful to you. And our face is flush, our hair stands up on the back of our neck. This is definitely not peaceful, right? Being triggered. And it happens to us though, every day. And it can be just a look from somebody that you don't even know that triggers you. And of course, we want to be peacemakers. We want to spread peace. So how do we move beyond this? Now, it's interesting to understand how the brain processes information. It comes in through our five senses, goes through something called the thalamus, a relay station sent up to our prefrontal cortex, our executive functioning center, and our fear center. But here's the thing. Our fear center is 4 times faster at processing information, so it can hijack that information and you can react from fear. The brake on our instinctual reactions is located here. We really want to wait to move the information up to here, where our logic and reasoning is, where our understanding of right and wrong, where our ability to choose love as a thoughtful response and become our highest and best version of ourselves. That's what we want. So this happens in a pause in between what's happening and our response. Very necessary. And this, I will introduce our choice moment to you. This is how we become the best version of ourselves. This is how we spread peace at home and in our communities. And you'll be looking at people that can do this. And and have this understanding, because we're not born with it. We have to learn it. We can model it for our kids and our communities, and the world will be a safer, more peaceful and loving place when we pause in between what's happening and our response. This is where our freedom and power lies, because the fact of the matter is, if we react in anger, we get rewarded from our brain. If we can pause and get curious about what the point of pain of the other person is, if anybody ever approaches you with anything less than a smile, they're coming from pain. And that's when we can pause, move the information to our prefrontal cortex, where logic and reasoning reside, where we can make what we call a heroic choice, because really we're wired to defend. That happens in the trigger point. And we can choose perhaps forgiveness, perhaps compassion. And of course, we've already used courage to pause after that trigger. This is really important. This is what we're teaching kids all over the world. Is this exciting or what? Because this is the world that I want to live in, where we can literally grow through difficulty and not be taken down and take down others by it. And so when, however, and you get a reward, when you thoughtfully respond with love, you get a dose of nurturing, healing love. You still get your dopamine, you get oxytocin, the love hormone, serotonin, your body's natural mood stabilizer, and endorphins, which are your body's natural painkillers. So a lasting lift of feeling good. And this is when we're in control. If you're triggered and you react in kind, which is what our brains want us to do, and reward us for that, actually, you're handing your power to the other person on a silver platter. And I don't know about you, but I want to maintain control and I want to spread peace. So literally, you can ask yourself, who's the boss of me, fear or love? And then the person coming to you and you're interacting with, who's the boss of them, fear or love? And if it's fear, then have empathy for them and thoughtfully respond with love. This is I'm wrapping up here, a personalized license plate that I have. Now, I'm the Choose Love lady. When I got the license plate in the mail, it said chose love. Wah, wah. And I'm thinking, how am I going to make that work? And then somebody said to me, you know what? Just because you chose love yesterday doesn't mean that you're going to do it again today. And you're going to be hit with curveballs and different situations where you're going to have to take out the formula and the model and choose love again. So it's a great reminder that this is an ongoing thing, but so is this effort towards peace and healing in our homes, in our communities, and in our world. So I want to thank you so much for choosing love as a thoughtful response, and for spreading peace in our homes and communities.
Scarlett, thank you so much for that. What a powerful talk. What really resonated for me, raising a 15-year-old boy, is what you said about attention is the highest form of love. And you want to focus on nurturing love and choosing love over fear. How powerful is that? Thank you so much, Scarlett. And for also reminding us that peace isn't a theory, right? It's a daily choice, even in the face of unimaginable pain. Thank you for teaching us also about compassion. And now, from personal courage, we turn to collective resistance. Our next speaker, Ela Gandhi, is an anti-apartheid activist, interfaith leader, and former member of the South African Parliament. The granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi, she has dedicated her life to advancing nonviolence, social justice, and reconciliation in one of the world's most divided societies. In her keynote, Nonviolence and Social Justice, Nurturing the Seeds of Peace at Home, Ela shares how the lessons of forgiveness and nonviolence she learned in her own family home helped her endure the struggle against apartheid, and how those same values can guide us into transforming oppression, against oppression, into a lasting peace. Please welcome Ela Gandhi.
Greetings to all of you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my experiences. Speaking of my experiences under apartheid violence and injustice in South Africa, and how I personally coped with issues of healing and reconciliation is a painful exercise. Indeed, thousands of South Africans made many sacrifices, not least paying the ultimate price that South Africa can be free. In trying to bring about systemic changes so that others do not suffer similar violence and injustice, I, together with my many colleagues, chose to use nonviolent methods of protest. But we were met with untold violence and incarceration from the apartheid government of the time. For me, the seeds of nonviolence and social justice were certainly planted in the home environment. Basic values of nonviolence and of justice and social consciousness were transmitted to us at an early stage of our development. It was this that gave us the strength to resist the effects of, in my case, our segregated neighborhood, in our segregated schools, and the many discriminatory practices that we suffered under an unjust system of apartheid. From early childhood days of my life, I was told stories about courage and nonviolence, and later witnessed the courageous, nonviolent actions taken by those opposed to the apartheid injustices in South Africa. I was taught that nonviolence requires far more courage than violence. My parents did not wish me to be exposed to apartheid education system, and for several years I was homeschooled. But at the age of 9, I had already acquired critical thinking, which my parents encouraged, and so I asked to attend the government school, which was about 3 kilometers away from my home. I was aware and conscious of the many flaws in the apartheid teaching system. I was able to discern right from wrong and the importance of social justice, regardless of gender, race, class, or creed. So I would not be influenced by apartheid biased education. From my parents, I learned 2 key principles that have since helped to shape my thinking and my life. The first is unconditional love of all, and the second, forgiveness, as those who violate principles and values are misdirected, and if given a chance and direction, they can change. At the age of 14, I saw my father defy unjust laws and being imprisoned. Living in apartheid South Africa, my family and I were exposed to the many discriminatory practices against non-white people. But our values were reinforced as daily at our prayers we spoke about unconditional love and forgiveness. We learned that people are products of the environment, and when they realize that what they are doing is wrong, they can change. So while I experienced humiliations, I did not allow anger and hatred to consume me. Instead, it made me all the more determined to do all I can to change things. I began participating in mass actions organized by our liberation movement. When I was 8 years old, my grandfather was assassinated. I had just met him and spent time with him and grew close to him on my first visit to India. Only a few weeks after our return to South Africa, we got the news of his assassination. As a child, my first reaction was of anger and felt that the man who did this must be given the harshest punishment. But my father and mother talked to me about forgiveness, and that our faith teaches us that revenge and reprisal are not good and only help to perpetuate violence. It was difficult to accept, but slowly in our hearts we were able to forgive the assassin. Later, as a 13-year-old, I can recall the experiences my mother undauntingly struggled through while my father served his 10th and last imprisonment. My mother had to take care of me and manage my father's work of publishing a weekly newspaper. I was proud of my parents and their resilience and bravery, and it left an indelible impression on my mind. Do the right thing no matter what the consequences. That was a motto I cherished over the years. As my late husband and I were deeply involved in the struggle for freedom through various activities, we were also prepared for consequences which hit us a few months into our marriage when my husband was served with a 5-year banning order. Later, he served 2 more banning orders and then house arrest orders. My personal first experience of adversity was in 1973, when on my son's 9th birthday, I was served with a 5 years house arrest order renewed for another 3.5 years. I had to leave the celebrations. It was a very bitter experience, but my family and I had to adjust to it and continue with our lives as best as we could. It was tough on the children, but we did not let it deter us. But when 10 years later, the same child was taken into detention by the police and kept almost 40 days, the harsh reality of incarceration took its toll on all of us. My 19-year-old son bore it bravely and did not let it break him. But that incarceration was difficult to live through, as it is difficult to bear the suffering of our children. We were not able to communicate with him at all during the 40 days of his arbitrary detention. They gave no reasons for any of these atrocities. The final blow was when another 10 years later, my son was killed in apartheid violence on 16th December 1993. No culprit was found. We took the matter up to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and all they could tell us was that it was established that this was part of the violence that took place in our province, KwaZulu-Natal. It was difficult to deal with this. I could easily deal with my own incarcerations and possible death, but when they touch our children, it is very hard. Many mothers like me suffered this kind of tragedy at that time in our country. This is the price we pay for standing up for our rights. At these terrible times, it is only our faith and prayers that helped us cope with the pain of loss. But it is also a strength we are able to mobilize from our parents, our home, and our colleagues who stood by my family and me through these ordeals over the years. It is also when one has strong conviction in the righteousness of our struggle. We learn to stand together in solidarity with each other's pain and suffering, and the fact that we are not alone in the suffering helps us cope. I remember thinking that our president, Mandela's son, died while he was in prison. He was not even allowed to attend the funeral and had to grieve away from his family among his colleagues in prison. How great was his suffering! We cannot buckle up at this stage of our struggle, so we threw ourselves back into the struggle, finally seeing liberation in the following year, 1994. Today, we are struggling to realize the dream of the liberation, and many of us continue to fight against the corruption and poor service delivery, the increasing poverty and lack of access to basic necessities of life. The struggle continues, and we have to find answers to the ills in our society for future generations to have a better life. The home is where the answer lies. We can make a difference. Of course, we fail and falter, but we must continue to try and renew the core values of our faiths and help to entrench them in the future generations so that we can build a community based on love, compassion, and empathy, and not on materialism and selfishness. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share my experiences.
Thank you so much for that, Ela. You remind us that the values we learn at home, forgiveness, empathy, and fearlessness, can become the foundations for entire movements of peace. Well, from South Africa, we now turn to right here on Turtle Island to a different story of resilience in the face of systemic harm. Nagosat, a Cree leader and 60 Scoop survivor, has dedicated her life to restoring safety, dignity, and cultural belonging for Indigenous women and children. As executive director of the Native Women's Shelter of Montreal and an advocate for truth and justice, she shows us what it means to turn pain into purpose. In her keynote, Indigenous Resistance, Nagosat invites us to confront the legacies of domination and to imagine what partnership looks like when love, truth, and accountability lead the way. Please welcome Nagosat.
The Peace Begins at Home Summit. And I think for Indigenous people, we haven't had too much peace at home for many, many generations. So as I was introduced, I am the executive director of the Native Women's Shelter, and I was originally born in Thompson, Manitoba. But my community is Lac La Ronge, Saskatchewan, Treaty 6, and I am Cree. I am of the Cree Nation. So my mother went to residential school, and for those who are unaware of what residential school is, it is a school where the government and the churches forced Indigenous families to go there. If your parents did not allow you to go, they would put you in jail. And this has gone on for over 100 years. The last residential school closed in 1996. So my mother went to residential school, and her experience was devastating. And there's lots of effects of residential school. At the Native Women's Shelter, we have many people that come in that are themselves survivors or intergenerationally impacted, like myself. So my experience was that I did not go to residential school. However, the government, when they started to close the residential schools, they wanted to create another type of assimilation process. And instead of the schools, what they did was they had the social workers get involved and go across Canada and take young children and put them into the foster care system. So this was born out of Saskatchewan. It was called the AIM program, Adopt an Indian or Métis program. And sometimes the social workers would go into people's houses, do a visit, take a picture of the children, and it would end up in newspapers. And then they would apprehend the children. So when I was living at the time, I was in Thompson, Manitoba. The Jewish family that ended up adopting me was living in Montreal. And this is actually the Montreal newspaper where they were also involved in the AIM program. For whatever reason, in Montreal, the Jewish Family Services also was involved with the AIM program. And what was interesting was before they got involved with the AIM program, they were just, there were children that were of, all nationalities. When the AIM program started, it was just Indigenous children. So my parents had gone there, my adopted family had gone there, adopted my brother Neil, who was white. And then when they wanted another child, because they didn't think they could have kids, they went back. The only children they were offering at that time were Native children. And a lot of the times, the reason for the social workers to take the children was because the parents were unfit, neglectful, or had addictions. And my biological mother did have that issue. She was neglectful. But there are many families that were able to take care of their children, but the government really didn't want to look into that. They really wanted to take the children. And there was also financial incentives. So if a social worker found a family in the United States, they could get anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000 per child. And they also believed that children would just be better off in a white middle-class home. And also if children had poverty. So there's an enormous amount of poverty in certain communities, like at Awapiskat, where they don't have clean water, that would be a reason to take away the children. But that is also the government's fault because they did not install the proper ways to have clean water. And this is still an ongoing issue today in that community. This is the picture that my parents, I was in a catalog, and this is the picture that they chose. So this is me standing outside the foster home with my sister, who is next to me, but she was considered too old for adoption. And my parents were like, send her over. So I was taken from Thompson on a plane and brought to Montreal. And this is a picture of me with my blonde brother and blonde sister. And it's pretty obvious that I am adopted, but it was something that you do not talk about, right? And the family that adopted me really sort of bought into the whole idea that, my background needed to be erased and that I should not tell anyone I was Indigenous. And it was a very, very difficult upbringing. It was not a happy home. However, I had a wonderful grandmother that in Yiddish we call her Bubby. And she used to look at me and had stars in her eyes and thought I would do great things one day. So she was really that person that offered me like all the love and all the confidence. And this is a picture of her in a wheelbarrow, and she was pregnant back in the day. And there's another picture of her with my grandfather when she was older. And this is my biological family. So my Bubby, if I go back to my Bubby, we were super close after I moved out. And I was on my own, and I was still going to her for guidance. She developed cancer, and she knew she was going to pass away. And she was like, you need to reconnect with your family, and I will help you find your family. And she did. And then that's how I was able to get my Indian status and go back to school. But she was the one. So it was her sort of dying wish to send me back to my family. And this is my family. So I was able to meet my mom and my sister and my nieces and nephews. And that really sort of helped me with my sort of direction and how I was going to move in my life. So having my Indian status, I was able to go back to university and get a degree. And I also started working at the Native Women's Shelter in 1999, and I'm still there. So I started out as a volunteer, and then I became the executive director in 2004. And what's really Indigenous people, not only in Montreal, but across Canada. So for Canada, we have tried to bring different issues to light, sort of like the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Inquiry that took almost 4 years. There were 231 calls to justice that the government was supposed to implement. That was 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Only one has been accomplished. And then in Quebec, they had the Viens Commission. So that was also discrimination against Indigenous people, 142 recommendations. Maybe like a third, maybe a fourth have been accomplished. Truth and Reconciliation report in 2015. So it's almost the 10-year anniversary. I think it's in the, I don't know, it's going to be in a couple of months that it's going to be the exact anniversary of 10 years. And there are 94 calls to action. And in 10 years, the government has only been able to complete 15, which is really, really difficult. And the number one TRC is the child welfare system, because even though the 60 scoop ended, it didn't really end. There are more Indigenous children in care than there were by times a factor of 3 that went to residential school. There are so many kids in care. It's really, really discouraging. So as an Indigenous person working at the shelter, I need to create new programs to support families and support children. One of the programs that I started was called Miyoskamin. So Miyoskamin is a Cree word for the heart of innovation, groundbreaking, or breaking the mold. So at the Native Women's Shelter, you can stay there for, 3 to 6 months or 9 months, depending on each family. But where are they going to go after they finish the shelter? So what we wanted to do was build a second stage housing. So we did. So we can have up to 23 families living at Miyoskamin. And what we also did was open a social pediatric center within the building that we call Jedlicka. So if you look at the sign, you can almost read it. So this is a transitional housing. So you can live there up to 3 to 5 years. And you have furnished, beautiful apartments. We provide everything. And we also have a program for either going back to school or back to a trade. So when you finish your time, you have the career of your choice. So at Miyoskamin, we have wraparound services. We have a whole bunch of staff that are there 24/7. And we have workers like an intergenerational trauma worker. We don't have social workers. We call them empowerment workers. And then we also have a social pediatric center where we bring in other experts. So Jedlicka means butterfly in Inuktitut, and it's child-centered. So it's for any Indigenous family in Montreal. Anyone can come and get these services. And when it comes to youth protection, we also have hired our own lawyer, because it's really hard to find a good lawyer. You may not be able to afford one. And also there's a lot of biases. So we hire our own lawyer. We have our own educator. We have a full team that is almost like warriors around the women and families. So when any time an issue comes up, we have them right at arm's length for them. Within Miyoskamin and Jedlicka, we are able to close 2 youth protection files. That is huge. This is what we need to do because the government is not applying any of the recommendations. We are creating our own solutions because we can't wait. So another thing that is really difficult that stems from residential schools is the fact that there are mass graves. And when the TRC came out, it was discussed, it was shared, it's in, the literature. But in Kamloops, there was a discovery of 215 mass graves in May of 2021. A month later, there was in Saskatchewan 751 mass graves. And there was a huge outcry. And all the world was paying attention, but they're not really paying attention anymore. And the thing is that when, the first 215 mass graves were announced, I did the first oh, sorry, this is a picture of markers for the mass graves. So in 2021, I did the first Every Child Matters March, and we had maybe up to like 5,000 people that showed up. And I've been doing it every year. However, there's a time where you don't want to walk anymore. You actually want justice. And I have a friend and colleague named Alithia, who is an Enoch filmmaker. And she said, when do we get our own Nuremberg trial? When are people held accountable to these mass graves? Because we are just learning about it and it's not in the history books yet. So when do we get our own Nuremberg trial? So I ended up having a meeting with Amnesty International, and I asked them, what is the closest thing right now we can get to a Nuremberg trial? And they told me it is a permanent people's tribunal. And so I wrote to them, and they are based in Rome, and they will be coming to Montreal to have a permanent people's tribunal on missing Indigenous children and unmarked graves, May 25th, 2026. So many people don't know what a permanent people's tribunal in Canada is because they are based in Rome, but they have been around for 50 years. And although it's an international opinion, what they say could have huge implications. So what we ended up doing was, because I had actually spoken at the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Inquiry, I was testifying for 3 days. The lawyer who represented me, her name is Krista Bidcanoe, and I had reached out to her to ask her if she was interested. So she said yes. And what is even more beautiful was she said, I'll do it for free. So we have all these different people that have come together in a really beautiful way to help bring light to what has happened with the missing children and mass graves. And what's great about Krista is that she also found 5 additional Indigenous lawyers to look over the indictment. So we've worked with international human rights lawyers. One of them, Eric Sullivan, has actually done a PPT. There's been 3 in Canada, so he was involved in one of them. So he'll also be involved in this one as well. So he really knows what needs to be seen for this, because we're doing crimes against humanity. And we also have an elders committee and a survivors committee. So for the last couple of years, I've been meeting with them regularly, and every time we have something important to talk about, we get guidance from them. And we have amazing people that are going to be showing up, and we also have like new partners. So now we're partnering with the David Suzuki Foundation. We are working with Future Generations Foundation, with No History, and we also have a website for more information. So it's really important that we do this, and I think that when it becomes more public, it will be more public once the indictment is served to Canada. I think it's going to really bring inspiration to other Indigenous people that, we have to keep fighting, and the truth needs to be seen. And this is one way that we can do it. In terms of my work and my the reason why I'm here was really because of my grandmother, my Bubby. And I've been in this documentary called Becoming Naguset, and there was this writer, this children's writer, that saw it and said, this could be a book. Your Bubby's love can be a book. So we wrote a book. And it's really, really beautifully done. We had an Indigenous illustrator named One Dove who made it just gorgeous. But this is a book about what happens during the 60 Scoop. I believe it is the only book on the 60 Scoop for children, and it's done in a really good way. And it really is an homage to my Bubby, and also to my sister, because she was looking for me the whole time I was taken when I was 3. So I know that I don't have much time, and I hope I honored the time commitment. But for more information, please take a look at our website. We also have a website for the PPT called ourtruths.com. There's a little hyphen. And also, if anyone's interested in the book, these are the different places you can buy it. My co-author, Judith Henderson, is donating all the proceeds to the Native Women's Shelter. So that's really, really awesome. So, you know, everything that's happened to me, I've been able to have children of my own, and my children, you know, have, you know, love and peace at home. And it took a really long time, but when you have that sort of kernel of hope, it can change everything. So, you know, just sort of a salute to the elders who help us and support us. Thank you so much for listening to me. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Naguse, for sharing your truth and for sharing your story and for teaching us the importance of Indigenous resistance and reclamation. And again, the reminder that peace begins at home and does ripple out. Well, I want to hear what everyone has to say, their thoughts about the last few keynotes that we've seen. They've been incredibly powerful and moving and compelling. So on your screen, you'll see a QR code. And if you're watching on a laptop or a desktop, you can just scan it with your phone. And again, open the Mentimeter page, or if it's easier, click the link in the chat. You'll be asked a number of things. Which area feels most urgent in your community right now? So take a look at the options on your screen. You might be thinking that it's about childhood safety and protection, or maybe the most important thing for you is domestic and family violence, societal violence and conflict. It may also be about gender roles and relationships, or cultural survival and inclusion, structural inequality or injustice. There's also another option if you're thinking it's something else. There's click the options tab on your screen. So let's take a moment to feel which of these areas feels most urgent in your community. So far it looks like most of the people, what's resonating for them is domestic and family violence. And then number 2 that's coming up is societal inequality. Actually, societal inequality and injustice is number 1 now. That's such an important issue when we're thinking about the systems or the structures around us that create those inequalities. Another one that's really resonating with people is violence and conflict. Well, keep your answers coming and keep your eyes on the Mentimeter, but we do want you to come back to the Summit page as well. Thank you so much for sharing all of your answers. So right now, we are going to go into our next guest. I'll just give people a more moments to respond. Each word is a reflection of what matters most in our communities. Wherever we live, the patterns are connected. Harm and healing, domination and care. By naming what feels urgent, we begin to see where partnerships can take root. Thank you again for sharing your voice. So when we look at the issues that emerge, safety, equality, inclusion, we can see how personal experiences link to the wider systems we live within. Our next speaker, Franz Jedlicka, helps us explore that connection even further. A sociologist and peace researcher from the University of Vienna, Franz studies how societies come to see violence, inequality, and domination as normal, and what it takes to shift those norms towards partnership and peace. Please welcome Franz Jedlicka.
Hello. Thank you, and greetings from Austria, where it is about 4:30 in the afternoon right now. My peace research started with the question, can a country become peaceful when there is still a widespread use of violence against children? And to be precise, I mean corporal punishment of children. So that was the the question that struck me. And you don't have to be a scientist or a sociologist to answer this question. Anyone, it's also a philosophical question. Anyone can discuss this matter with friends and families. Can we become, especially if you live in a country where physical punishment of children is still legal, you can discuss this question. Can our country become sustainably peaceful when already beating children is allowed? And the title of my talk, The Forgotten Peace Formula, is the title also of my ebook that you can find out there on the internet. So what I did was to search for worldwide data regarding violence against children and about the legislation regarding corporeal punishment. And the sad thing is, right now, only in 1/3 of the countries worldwide, corporeal punishment of children is prohibited. And this leads to an even bigger question, of course. Can the world become a peaceful place when in so many countries children are not protected from violence? And one source of data that you can easily access on the internet is the Wikipedia page, Child Corporal Punishment Laws. And there you also have the kind of timeline, which countries were the first ones to abolish physical punishment of children. And there you see Austria has been the 4th one in 1989. Sweden, Finland, Norway, many European countries. And in fact, European countries are right now among the most peaceful ones. And I compared these data with the Global Peace Index. The Global Peace Index is a report that is published every year, and you also can download it as a PDF without any cost. And in fact, Austria is right now the 4th, is ranked 4th on this Global Peace Index. Means it's the 4th most peaceful country in the world. And 7 European countries are also ranked among the 10 best countries. But the legislation regarding child corporal punishment is not the only source of data. I also needed data regarding the real violence against children. And the main source for that is UNICEF. They had in the past 2 reports. One of them is called A Familiar Face, but that's already 5 years ago. Now they have a kind of data website that you can easily find, but they use the term violent discipline. So if you Google for UNICEF violent discipline, you get a map with updated data on violence against children. I had and let me say about something about the current armed conflicts. For example, Russia. In my opinion, there has been a psychological prologue to the attack of Russia on Ukraine, because in the year of 2017, the Russian Duma, which is some kind of governmental, I don't know if you could call it parliament, they decided to lower the laws regarding child corporal punishment and regarding violence against women. So some years before the attack on Ukraine, in my opinion, there has been a kind of brutalization within Russia. And if you look at the other current armed conflicts in the world, Afghanistan has no ban of corporal punishment. Somalia, Yemen, many African states, many countries in the MENA region. MENA is the short term for Middle East and North Africa. So that confirmed in many ways my theory that a widespread violence against children has an impact on the peacefulness of nations. But I have to admit, the linkage was not as clear as I hoped it would be. And but I found an answer for this problem. It takes a generation. It takes about 20 or 30 years until a generation that has grown up without any violence in childhood grows up and comes into political power. Then I had some criticism from colleagues who said, well, Franz, maybe there are other factors regarding the peacefulness of nations. Of course, that is true, but I once again tried to find psychological factors, and I created what I call the culture of violence scale, where I included additional items. I examined the laws regarding torture, so which countries still practice torture, which countries have capital punishment, which countries still allow violence against women, marital rape, and the punishment of homosexuals, and judicial corporal punishment. That means punishment in the prisons. By the way, there seem to be some countries where children can be punished in prisons through physical punishment. That's a real tragedy, I think. But let me tell you something about the process of coming there. Of course, I was looking for literature. Who else has done research about the impact of childhood on politics, on wars? And then the first book that really caught me was by Alice Miller, For Your Own Good. Alice Miller is a very famous author, best-selling author. I think everybody who is dealing with violence against children should read her books. And in this book, For Your Own Good, she examined the childhood of Adolf Hitler. And he has suffered from extreme violence in childhood. Of course, that should not be an excuse for what he has done. But it should be a challenge to examine also the childhood of other politicians. And there's a historian in Germany who continues this important work. And I regret that this book is not available in English. His name is Sven Fuchs. I think we have, after this summit, some kind of documentation, written documentation. So I will provide all the names, all the books. And Sven Fuchs is really digging into the biographies of political persons. Have they experienced violence or not? And he finds, political actors who have started wars, who have continued wars. He examined the biographies of dictators, of warmongers, and he found violence in each and every childhood of them. And by the way, because I think many people from the USA are watching, he said that Donald Trump, as well as J.D. Vance, and even Elon Musk, they have all experienced violence in childhood. And I think it should be discussed what kind of impact that has on the political influence they have. A very basic question then is, maybe you have heard the narrative, wars have always been, wars will always be. But there is growing evidence, and I think we will hear it also from Dr. Davidson afterwards, that basically it's in our genes to be peaceful, to be cooperative, to be loving. And one author who has really published a very concise book on that is Rutger Bregman with Humankind. He debunks the narrative that in case of catastrophes, people are starting to steal, are starting to rob. He says the reality is whenever there is a catastrophe, people cooperate, they help each other. So that's the truth. And in Germany, we have an author who has written this book, The Cooperative Gene. Another important book and an important TED talk is by Robin Grill, Parenting for a Peaceful World. He's an Australian psychologist who I think there's no better way to say what parents can do to create a better world. And by the way, if someone is listening from a country, in a country where there is a very authoritarian regime, where you don't have much chances to change the political situation, I think the one thing you still can do is start to raise children without violence, to sow the seed of peacefulness, at least in the family, right? And then there is literature about the training of soldiers. Yeah? Colonel David Grossman wrote this book in which he says that, in fact, it is very hard to train soldiers to really kill another person. They would do anything not to shoot as another person, which shows the empathy they really have, that every person has. Another confirmation of violence in childhood and violence as an adult comes from criminal sociology, criminal psychology. Jonathan Pincus has written this book after interviewing delinquents, criminals in prisons, and he has found violence in every childhood of these persons. A very good approach and research platform is the Early Childhood Peace Consortium. And on this page, you can also see a recent report about the transgenerational trauma of violence in childhood. That is, of course, another horrible thing that it has to do with epigenetics, that trauma really is transferred to the next generation and even maybe 2 generations afterwards. Then already in the 1950s of the last century, there was this book, The Authoritarian Personality. Some authors have tried to find out why did so many people follow Hitler? And they made a lot of interviews and basically found out that it is a strict parenting style that was common back at that time, which leads to the effect that these persons want again a strong leader in the country, the political system. And there's a similar book about the USA, which is called Raised to Rage by Michael Milburn and Cherie Conrad. So they, from the data I know, violence against children is relatively high in the USA, and there is no legal ban regarding corporal punishment there. Then another author in the USA has coined the term the strict father model. This is from Wikipedia. It's George Lakoff, and he basically says the same. Some people who have experienced strict parenting are longing for a strict political leader. I'm not sure if my time is running out. So basically, what my main message is, if everyone who wants peace must stand up for legal ban of corporal punishment. And there is this great website, End Corporal Punishment. You can easily find it. They are the most important website for this issue. And the least thing you can do is to make a post on social media using the hashtag End Corporal Punishment. So I think I've said the most, and there are also free manuals out there regarding how to start a process reducing violence against children. And I think the most important one is called Inspire Strategy. And these are also free PDF ebooks on the internet. Inspire Handbook, Inspire a second manual. So I thank you for the invitation. Thank you for listening. And I hope I've given you some insight into the international and political linkages between violence against children and wars and political systems in general.
Thank you so much, Franz. You've helped us see how patterns we tolerate in our homes and our societies can normalize violence on a global scale, and how shifting those norms toward care can begin to heal them. Thank you so much. Well, our next speaker takes us even deeper into the human mind itself. Dr. Richard Davidson is one of the world's leading neuroscientists and a pioneer in the study of emotion and the brain. As founder of the Center of Healthy Minds at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, his groundbreaking research shows us that just as our brains can be shaped by fear and trauma, they can also be rewired for peace through compassion, mindfulness, and emotional learning. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Richard Davidson.
I'm a psychologist and neuroscientist by training, and in the early part of my career, I was motivated by one particular question, which still is very pertinent to the work that we do. And the question is, why is it that some people are more vulnerable to life's slings and arrows, and why are others more resilient? In the early part of my career, I focused quite heavily on the negative or adversity side of this equation. I studied the brain mechanisms that confer vulnerability to stress and anxiety and depression. And all of that changed for me in 1992 when I first met His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama challenged me on that day in 1992 and very innocently asked, why can't we use the same tools of modern science that we use to study anxiety and depression and stress and fear, and use those tools to study kindness and to study compassion? And that was a wake-up call for me that led to a dramatic pivot toward these positive qualities of the human mind. Now, it turns out that the adversity side of things and the flourishing side of the human repertoire are intimately linked in very important and surprising ways. And so in these few minutes that we have together, I'd like to share a few of the insights that we've gleaned from modern neuroscience that pertains to how the brain responds to both trauma and how the brain can actually be healed through the cultivation of the innate positive qualities that all human beings have the capacity for, and that fundamentally is to flourish. So let's begin on the adversity side. And there are two important concepts that are critical to introduce and understand that lie at the core of why it is that trauma can have the deleterious, devastating kinds of consequences that it does, and also why it is that we have the capacity for genuine healing and transformation. And those two concepts are these. The first is neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity refers to the notion that the brain can be changed in response to experience and in response to training. And in fact, we can go even further to say that the brain is really the organ that's built to change in response to experience. It is an associative machine, if you will, that can learn from experience and is constantly being shaped by the forces around us. And one of the things that I often say is that the brain is constantly being shaped wittingly or unwittingly. And most of the time, our brain is being shaped unwittingly. Most of the time, there are forces around us that are impinging upon the brain, much of which we're unaware of. Yet we can document and demonstrate that these forces, this input, is indeed changing the brain, and in many cases can be having a deleterious effect on the brain. One of the other things I'm fond of reminding people is that today we are all part of a grand experiment for which none of us have provided our informed consent. And of course, what I mean by that is we're all barraged with information online constantly. This has become, unfortunately, a part of our lives. And we know that much of this information can have a really toxic effect on our capacity to flourish. And so the flip side of this is that the um, strategies that we can deploy to train our mind and cultivate qualities like compassion and kindness, which I'll say more about in a few minutes, utilize the same mechanism of neuroplasticity. Yet we can deploy it for the positive. So when trauma occurs, it induces deleterious consequences in the brain that can be very well documented. And these changes in the brain can, at least in part, be changed or influenced or reversed by training the mind. So again, I'll unpack all of that in more detail in just a few moments. I want to introduce the second concept. I mentioned that there are two concepts that are really important in understanding how adversity affects the mind and the brain and the body, and also how transformation for the positive can occur. The second mechanism, in addition to neuroplasticity, is what we call epigenetics. Epigenetics is the science of how our genes are regulated. You can think of our genes having little volume controls that range from very low to very high. And one of the things that is so striking in modern research is to the finding that our genes are constantly being influenced, constantly being upregulated or downregulated by our environmental circumstances, by the conditions in which we live, by the inputs that we receive, by our emotional demeanor, by how we respond to stressful life challenges. All of that has been shown to influence our epigenetics, the extent to which different genes are turned on or turned off. And this has enormous consequences for understanding how trauma may affect the mind, brain, and body, and also how cultivating positive qualities of the mind can influence not only our mental outlook, but it can actually also change our physical bodies in ways that may be consequential for our health. So let's unpack this now a little bit. And what I'd like to do is share with you a little bit of research on the impact of trauma on the brain and specifically violence and how violence might be mediated in the brain, and then also talk about how we can intentionally change our brain and through training our mind that can cultivate positive qualities to counteract some of these negative effects. So, a variety of research indicates that early life events, particularly early childhood adverse experiences, traumas, can have an effect on the brain. It can lead to a kind of scarring of the brain. And these changes in the brain are both structural and functional. By structural, we mean changes literally in the wiring of the brain, in the extent to which the brain is larger or smaller in different regions. It's been found that exposure to trauma can affect all of these different components of brain structure and also the functioning of the brain. And there are circuits in the brain that are really important for how we regulate our emotions. And these circuits include um, uh, three major networks in the brain. One network we call the default mode, another network we call the central executive network, and a third network is the salience network. These networks have different functions. They include different parts of the brain. They all work together, but the relationship among them, as well as some of their individual components, we know uh, um, can be affected by trauma, and those impacts can actually lead a person to be more predisposed to exhibiting violence. And one of the key mechanisms is the capacity to regulate our emotions. And one of the things that's been found among certain individuals who are prone to violence is differences in the circuitry involved in regulating emotions. And this circuitry involves interactions among the salience network, the central executive network, and the default mode network. So those changes that can be influenced by exposure to early childhood adverse experiences are also networks that we know can be influenced by training the mind. And there is um, um, training that has been described in many of the contemplative traditions, including the contemplative traditions of Asian origin that have developed a technology for harnessing our innate capacities to train the mind to increase the capacity or increase the likelihood for expressing more virtuous qualities of the mind, qualities like mindfulness and compassion. So these are mediated through these various brain networks. And it's been found that even relatively modest amounts of training can, in fact, can impact measures of brain function and brain structure. So we know that training even as little as 7 hours over the course of 2 weeks is sufficient to produce meaningful changes in the brain, and specifically in these circuits that are really important for emotion regulation. So, just to give a very specific example from our own work, this is work that's been published in very high profile kinds of scientific journals. And what we've been able to show is that among people who've never meditated before, if they're randomly assigned to a training where they receive instruction on cultivating compassion. And what we mean by this is they're instructed to bring into their mind and their heart, for example, a loved one, and imagine a time in this loved one's life where they may have been experiencing some challenges, some difficulty, and then cultivate the genuine aspiration that they be relieved of that suffering. And you can use a simple phrase that you repeat several times silently in your mind, a phrase like, may you be happy, may you be free of suffering. Something simple of that sort, whatever might resonate with you that has the same basic meaning. And you repeat it a few times in your mind, and then you move on to different categories of people. So we begin with a loved one, we then move on to ourselves, we then move on to a person that we call a stranger, a person who you recognize, but you may not know very well. It could be a person who works in the same office that you work in, but you don't really know much about their life. And here you imagine a time in their life when they may have had some challenge. And then you cultivate the same, aspiration that they be relieved of suffering. Very simple. And then from there, we move on to another category, which is really important. And that is to a difficult person, someone who may push your buttons, who may irritate you in some way, and do this for that person in a very genuine way where you bring them into your mind and your heart and you cultivate the aspiration that they be relieved of the challenge that they may have experienced or the difficulty that they've endured. And it turns out doing this for just 30 minutes a day for 2 weeks, a total of 7 hours, is sufficient to produce changes in the brain in these very same circuits that are abnormally impacted by early childhood trauma, which can lead to dysfunctions in emotion regulation and potentially increase vulnerability to violent kinds of outbursts because emotion becomes very dysregulated. So the important message here in all of this is that there are a few messages. One is that the very same mechanisms in our brain that are influenced by trauma are the mechanisms that we can harness for liberation, for awakening, for flourishing. And what this requires is the intentional cultivation of these qualities through a kind of simple mental exercise. One of the striking things about a quality like kindness or like compassion is that when we cultivate it in the way that I described, we're not cultivating it, um, we're not cultivating it out of nowhere, but rather these are qualities that are inherently a part of our mind from the very beginning. In fact, there is good research to show that humans exhibit what we might call innate basic goodness. That is, they come into the world with a preference or a bias, if you will, toward pro-sociality. There is a predisposition for encounters that are cooperative, that are more compassionate, that are warm-hearted. This is what humans are drawn to. And this research shows that if you, for example, look at the behavior of young infants when they first come into the world, and this research has started with 6-month-old infants, what you see is that infants at 6 months of age exhibit a strong preference for pro-social encounters compared to encounters that may be aggressive or selfish or violent kinds of encounters. And so when we are cultivating qualities like kindness or compassion, we're not cultivating them out of nothing, but rather we're actually reminding ourselves of our true nature. And when we do this, it literally has been found to change the brain in these circuits that are so important for regulating our emotions and ultimately for us to be able to flourish. Now, finally, I want to end by suggesting that these changes in the brain are what is really important um, in enabling the changes that occur during the practice of these mental exercises, enabling those changes to endure. So these changes in the brain can last longer than the time when we're actually engaged in this mental exercise, and they can lead to these longer lasting changes, which we think are crucial in enabling these changes to infuse other aspects of our lives. So when we practice these simple forms of compassion training, it's not simply to be compassionate when we're practicing them, but of course it's to prepare ourselves to be compassionate wherever the opportunity arises as we go about our daily life. And the changes that occur in the brain are really essential in sustaining those changes and enabling them to be longer lasting. And finally, I want to end by suggesting that the epigenetic changes that I mentioned earlier, those changes may be important in altering bodily systems in a way that is health promoting. So, one of the things that happens with exposure to early childhood adverse kinds of experiences is that not only does it affect us mentally, but it affects us physically as well. There are physical changes that occur and that actually compromise our physical health. And one of the major influences in that is inflammation. Chronic inflammation is an important component of many chronic illnesses. And what's been found is that when we engage in training in compassion, for example, not only does it change the brain, but it induces epigenetic changes which have an important role to play in regulating inflammatory processes in the body, which ultimately may be responsible for improved physical health. So, to summarize, this is a whole mind, brain, body package, and the evidence indicates that early childhood adverse experiences and trauma can leave long lasting effects on the brain and the body, and that these very same mechanisms which allow this trauma to influence our brain and our body can be harnessed for the good. And through training our mind, we can change our brain and change our bodies in ways that can ultimately promote human flourishing. So I hope that these few minutes of remarks is helpful in understanding the scientific perspective in all of this, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davidson. You've shown us that peace isn't just an ideal, it's something we can cultivate within the brain and the heart. Well, before we pause for a short break, we'll hear from two of our youth voices of the future, young leaders showing what partnership looks like in action. From Morocco, Chaïmae Ribani is a decolonial feminist, activist, and youth advocate who reflects on reclaiming voice and agency in a world still learning equality. And from Sierra Leone, Sheku Mohamed Gassimu, Partnership and Program Director at One Village Partners, reminds us that peace grows through community in how we listen, work, and rebuild together. Together, they invite us to imagine what a culture of partnership looks like when the next generation leads the way.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ribani, and I'm speaking you today from Rabat, Morocco. I'm very honored today to join this global conversation at the Peace Begins at Home Summit, where we explore how the patterns we inherit in our home shape the world around us. Violence in families is not isolated. It reproduces hierarchies of power rooted in patriarchy, colonialism, and capitalism. The dynamics of man over woman, adult over child, echo the system that have structured nations and economies. This determines who has access to resources and who is silenced. What happens at home is never private, it is quite political. For centuries, the home has been framed as a private space, a place outside politics. But this notion of privacy is itself a colonial and patriarchal tool, used often to silence women, children, and marginalized communities. Intimate violence, control, and exclusions are connected to histories of conquest, dispossession, and domination. The colonial feminism challenges this separation of private and public, exposing how the injustices we see in home are mirrored in the global systems. The summit invites us to imagine partnerships as the antidote to domination, but partnership is not a gentle ideal, it is a radical restructuring of power. It dismantles hierarchies and centers dignity, justice, and reciprocity, not just in households, but in movements, institutions, and governance. Partnership is the practice of refusing to reproduce domination in any form and actively creating systems where power is shared. Young feminists today and change makers, as myself, are refusing to inherit these cycles of domination. We are not asking for a seat in existing tables, we are questioning these tables themselves. We are imagining futures where power is shared, voices silenced for generations are heard, and relationships are built on justice, equity, and accountability. True peace requires solidarity across borders. Movements, indigenous knowledge, and feminist organizations offer living models of partnership that resist domination. The work of building peace from the inside out, starting in our homes, extending it to our communities, and shaping global systems is the work of dismantling domination while building relationships rooted in equity and justice. True transformations begins at home, but it cannot end there. To build peace, we must decolonize our relationships, challenge entrenched hierarchies, and practice radical partnership in every sphere of life. The courage, the vision, and the collective action we cultivate today are not just acts of care, they are acts of resistance and the foundation for a truly peaceful tomorrow. This is a message for my peers. We must act courageously, imagine boldly, and refuse the systems of power that harms us. This is a message for my elders. Your wisdom, your solidarity are vital as we challenge domination and build partnership. If we commit to these practices today, the peace we envision, radical, equitable, and decolonial is not just possible, it is our responsibility. Thank you.
I am Sheku Mohamed Gassimu Jr., coming from Sierra Leone, West Africa. My presentation is actually going to focus on how we are centering partnership and community-led development. Being influenced by Riane Eisler's work a lot, especially about the cultural evolution that we need in order to move from systems of domination to a partnership way of life. That has been a lot for us as an organization. So One Village Partners, for us, our mission is to enhance collective well-being by investing in people and communities through partnership. And we are doing this by actually working with communities to implement locally led solutions to address multidimensional needs. In the communities that we work, what is very important is how we set the stage for how we work with them. So for us, we are the sharpening stone that community use to actually do their own work better. So the sharpness, the need for this is because we are helping to shift mindset of communities about what true grassroots development is. We are setting the spaces for dialogue with partner communities. We are equally defining expectations clearly with these communities, as well as deepening collective ownership and sustainability in the communities that we work with. So part of it is actually how we are helping to shift power in the communities that we work with. Shifting powers through participatory rural needs assessment, where we are bringing men, women, elderly, and children together to actually dialogue and identify their priorities as a community through voting. We believe that this is one way of involving everyone because we feel that everyone should be respected and valued. We have recognized over the years that in this work, when people are encouraged to participate, it creates the sense of ownership and sustainability over the work that we are doing or they themselves are leading. And we are shifting the power in Sierra Leone through project implementation. Communities are building interventions that actually addresses their multidimensional need through their own active participation. This is very important because we are also helping to strengthen and value local expertise to lead sustainable change in improving quality of life. So for us as an organization, what does a society built on partnership look like? It looks like a society where individuals intently listening to one another and share needs are being met. Where people can take steps for their development needs without waiting for an outside intervention. Where women and children are prioritized in interventions, their voices are respected, true equity exists, and everyone feels value. Where true spaces exist for shared learning and unlearning among different groups of people. And finally, where an ever-expanding right that protects everyone exists and respect for peace and human dignity is upheld. Our work over the years has been influenced by the work of Riane a lot. We have been inspired by her work and in ensuring how we are intentional about using power with communities and not over communities. From needs assessment, designing solutions to problem and so addressing their problems, these are the way of actively involving everyone and people being people-centric and putting people at the center of every decisions that the communities are taking. Different needs of people are being addressed with respect. This is what true partnership looks like for us. A message for my peers. As youth, we have to inwardly reflect about what it means for us to be actively involved in the development of our communities. Development activities that actually respect our needs as youth, and respect and value our voices, and provide spaces for us to be involved. This is how we can help develop our communities. For the elderly, please think about the youth, think about the children, invest in the youth, invest in the children, and ensure that their voices are respected in decision making, because this brings inner peace to everyone when people feel respected and their expertise are used in enhancing the well-being of their community. Everyone can help develop our community, and everyone can contribute to developing the world that we live in peace. Thank you.